The challenge, the snow-covered planet of Vorta, was quiet, a vast expanse of white and cold. Towering mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hidden by thick clouds. The only sounds that could be heard were the faint whispers of the wind sweeping through the frozen forests. It was a world of power, ruled by the mighty alien queen, Nerix. She stood tall, an imposing figure, her 8-foot frame casting a shadow over everything in her path. Her skin glowed with an orange hue, and her sharp, angular features made her look both fierce and beautiful. She was a force to be reckoned with. Nerix had lived for centuries, and during that time she had built a mighty empire, feared by every species in the galaxy. She had no time for weakness, and her mind was as sharp as her claws. She ruled with an iron fist, demanding respect from everyone she met. The idea of humans, small and fragile compared to her, was laughable. They were nothing but insignificant creatures, unworthy of her attention. But that was before the challenge. The leaders of her empire had come to her with troubling news. The humans, once thought to be weak and harmless, had begun to spread across the galaxy. Their influence was growing, and some of them had even made their way to the far reaches of space, to places where Nerix had never expected them to be. They were not a threat, but they were becoming an annoyance, and Nerix did not tolerate annoyance. They are weak, nothing more than pests, she had said, dismissing the news with a flick of her wrist. Their presence in my empire will be crushed. But there was more to this story than Nerix had anticipated. The humans had come up with a plan. They wanted to challenge the Queen's strength, to prove they were more than just a nuisance. A human, one of their finest warriors, had volunteered to face Nerix in single combat. The idea of a human challenging her was absurd, and she laughed when she first heard about it. How could a tiny creature, no taller than her leg, possibly think it stood a chance against her? It was foolish, a mockery of everything she had worked for. Yet there was something about the challenge that intrigued her. Nerix stood in the grand hall of her palace, her eyes narrowed in thought. The long corridor stretched before her, its walls adorned with trophies from battles won, from creatures conquered. Her subjects, the strongest of her people, watched her with respect, but there was an edge of fear in their gazes. They knew Nerix had no tolerance for failure, and they dared not speak out against her. A messenger arrived, panting and shaking from the cold, bringing word of the human's arrival. "He is here," the messenger said, bowing low before her. "The human warrior stands ready, awaiting your command, my queen." Nerix's lips curled into a smile, one filled with cold amusement. "Prepare the arena," she commanded. "I will give this human a lesson he will never forget." She walked toward the arena, her footsteps echoing through the stone halls. The snow was falling heavier now, and the cold air stung her skin, but she did not mind. The chill was nothing compared to the heat of battle, the thrill of showing her strength. When she stepped into the arena, the crowd of her subjects cheered, their voices rising in a thunderous roar. At the far end of the arena stood the human, his dark eyes locked onto hers. He was taller than most of his kind, and his muscles were defined, but he was still no match for her. Nerix could feel the power radiating from her own body. She was invincible. The human looked up at her with a mixture of awe and defiance. His armor was basic, nothing compared to the intricate, glowing plates of her own suit. But there was something in his eyes of fire that she couldn't quite place. He didn't fear her. He wasn't backing down. "Are you ready, little human?" Nerix's voice rang out, booming over the arena. Do you truly think you can defeat me? The human's jaw clenched, and without saying a word, he took a step forward. It was then that Nerix felt it the tiniest spark of something she hadn't expected. This human wasn't scared. In fact, he seemed eager, as though he welcomed the challenge. She was used to seeing fear in the eyes of those who faced her, but this one was different. Nerix's smile faded slightly. There was something about the human that made her pause, even if only for a moment. She had no reason to fear him, but something deep inside her wondered what would happen if he proved to be more than just a challenge. The crowd went silent as the two stood facing each other. The wind howled, the snow falling faster now, but Nerix stood firm, unwavering. The fight would begin soon, and in that moment, the Queen knew she would not just crush this human, she would make him regret ever challenging her. But as she prepared to move, she couldn't shake the feeling that this would not be a battle she could easily win. The unexpected encounter, the arena was silent. The cold air bit at the skin of everyone watching, but Nerix hardly felt it. Her focus was on the human before her, standing tall and unflinching, even as the snow swirled around them. She had seen many challengers in her time beasts, warriors, and armies, and none had ever dared to stand their ground like this human did. With a slight tilt of her head, Nerix motioned to begin. Her sharp eyes watched the human as he readied himself. He took a deep breath, his muscles tense beneath his armor. There was no fear in his gaze, only determination. Nerix found it ... curious. The human charged first, his movements fast and deliberate. He was quick, faster than she expected. But Nerix had been trained in combat for centuries. She sidestepped easily, her speed far surpassing his. She wanted to end this quickly, to remind him of his place, but something in the back of her mind told her to hold back just a little. The human's persistence intrigued her. The human swung a long, sharp blade at her, aiming for her side. Nerix's arm moved instinctively, deflecting the blow with ease. She could hear the loud clink of metal against metal, but the human didn't hesitate. He stepped back and swung again, faster this time, trying to find a weak spot in her defenses. Smiled, amused by his persistence. "Is that all you have, human?" she called out, her voice echoing across the cold arena. She could see the muscles in his arms strain with effort, but he kept coming, refusing to back down. This was no ordinary human. She had faced many who had faltered in the face of her power. They had crumbled beneath the weight of her presence. But this one, this human, fought like he had nothing to lose. His movements were sharp, his focus unwavering. For a brief moment, Nerix's smile faded as she realized she wasn't just dealing with any ordinary opponent. She was dealing with someone who wouldn't back down as the battle continued. Nerix couldn't help but feel a strange sense of respect growing inside her. She had expected this fight to be quick, to be over with a flick of her wrist, but it wasn't. The human had proven himself to be more than just an annoyance. He was a challenger, real one. He lunged at her again, but this time Nerix didn't move. She stood perfectly still, waiting for him to close the distance. At the last second, she grabbed his wrist, stopping the blade just inches from her chest. She could feel his strength, the tension in his arm, and it was ... impressive. "You're stronger than I thought," she said, her voice softer now, almost reluctant. The human looked into her eyes, his breath coming in short gasps. "I'm not backing down," he replied, his voice steady. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Nerix had never felt anything like it before. She was the queen, the ruler of countless worlds, feared by all, and yet here she was, facing a human who had the courage to stand before her. She could easily break his arm, crush him with a flick of her fingers, but something stopped her. She didn't want to, not yet. With a swift motion, she released his wrist, pushing him back with a gentle shove. He staggered but didn't fall. He stood his ground, breathing heavily, his eyes still locked on hers. Impressive, Nerix muttered, more to herself than to him. For a brief moment, the queen considered the idea of sparing him, of allowing him to fight another day. But she quickly shook off the thought. She had a duty to her empire, to her people. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She was the queen, and she would remain the queen. That's enough, Nerix said, raising her hand. The crowd of her subjects fell silent, watching her every move. You've proven yourself to be more than just a foolish human. But that doesn't mean you're worthy of anything more than a lesson. The human stood, waiting for her to make a next move, but Nerix didn't strike. Instead, she turned her back to him, a signal that the fight was over. Leave the arena, she ordered, her tone cold once more. I will not waste any more of my time on you. But as the human turned to leave, something unexpected happened. He paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder at her. You think you've won, but I'm not giving up, he said, his voice full of determination. You'll see, I won't be the last human to challenge you. Nerix looked at him for a long moment, her mind racing. The human's words lingered in the air. Was he serious? Did he truly believe that he could challenge her again? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something. She hadn't expected curiosity. As the human walked out of the arena, Nerix stood frozen, her mind consumed by his words. He had not just challenged her strength, he had challenged her entire belief system, and she realized, deep down, that this human, this insignificant creature had just opened her eyes to a new possibility. What would happen next? Nerix wasn't sure, but she couldn't help but feel that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger. A reluctant union days passed since the human had challenged Nerix, and the memory of his words echoed in her mind. She had thought little of him, at first a fleeting annoyance, a creature far beneath her. But now, his presence lingered in her thoughts. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted, something she couldn't control. Nerix stood on the balcony of her grand palace, overlooking the vast city of Vorta. Her empire was strong, its influence extending across the galaxy, and yet she found herself uneasy. The human had managed to do something none of her enemies had. He had made her question her own beliefs. She had always seen herself as invincible, untouchable. But now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure. The message came to her in the middle of the night. The human had requested an audience, a chance to speak with the queen. She considered denying him, casting him aside like the insect he was, but the curiosity inside her gnawed at her. What did he want? Why wasn't he backing down? Nerix couldn't deny it any longer. She was intrigued. When the human arrived, she didn't greet him with the grand spectacle of her usual meetings. She kept her distance, watching him closely as he entered the room. He was dressed in simple armor, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of respect and defiance. Nerix studied his face, the same determination she had seen before etched into his features. He didn't fear her. If anything, he seemed eager to speak, to engage with her on a level she wasn't used to. Why are you here? Nerix asked, her voice low and commanding. The human stood tall, his gaze unwavering. I came to talk, he said simply. I want to understand you. Why do you rule with such fear? Why do you push everything and everyone away? Nerix's eyes narrowed. You think you know me, human, she said with a sneer. You know nothing of my empire, my people, or the burden I bear. I rule because I must. Fear is the only thing that keeps the galaxy in line. Without it, chaos would reign. The human took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. You don't have to rule through fear. There's more to power than dominance. You're strong, but that doesn't mean you have to be cruel. Nerix's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being lectured, especially not by a human. But there was something in his words that struck a chord, something she couldn't ignore. She had always believed that power came from fear. But what if it didn't? What if there was another way to lead, another way to control her empire? The thought unsettled her, but she couldn't dismiss it. You're asking for the impossible, Nerix said, her voice colder now. You want me to change the way I rule, to abandon everything I've built. That's a fool's request. I'm not asking for you to abandon everything, the human replied. I'm asking you to consider that there's another way, a better way. You're not just a queen of fear, Nerix. You're a queen of strength, of wisdom. You could lead differently, with respect, and still be powerful. But it's your choice. I'm just here to show you there's more than one path. Nerix stared at him for a long moment. His words were ... compelling. She had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to control and dominate. But now, she wondered if there was a different kind of power she had overlooked. She couldn't admit it yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted. You speak of respect, human, Nerix said slowly, but respect is earned, not given freely. How can I trust you? How can I trust anyone who doesn't fear me? The human stepped closer, his voice gentle. Respect is earned through understanding, through compromise. It's not about fear, it's about trust. Trust that your people will follow you because they believe in you, not because they're afraid of you. For the first time, Nerix felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, whether it was a flicker of hope or the beginning of something more dangerous. But there was something in the human's eyes that made her question everything she had ever known. You think I can change? She asked, her voice quieter now. The human nodded. I believe you can. For a long moment, Nerix didn't speak. She felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, confusion, and a hesitant curiosity. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being the one to command respect. But now, the idea of leading with trust, of earning respect instead of forcing it, began to take root in her mind. You're a fool, Nerix finally said, though there was no malice in her tone. But perhaps you're not entirely wrong. The human smiled, a small, satisfied smile. I'll take that as a compliment. The tension in the room seemed to ease, though. Nerix couldn't explain why. She had expected this conversation to end with her dismissing him. But instead, it had left her with more questions than answers. You have one more chance, human, she said, her voice still firm but with an underlying uncertainty. If you continue to waste my time with these ridiculous ideas, I will have you removed. But if you can prove to me that your way works, then perhaps I will listen. The human bowed his head respectfully. I'll prove it to you, Nerix. I promise. As he turned to leave, Nerix watched him go. For a moment, she stood in silence, her mind racing. She couldn't explain it, but something about him, something about this human had gotten under her skin. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, But one thing was certain. It would be a path she never expected. And as the door closed behind him, Nerix couldn't help but wonder, was she ready for what was coming next? The unthinkable days that followed were filled with tension, a strange weight pressing down on Nerix's every decision. The humans, words, the challenge he had thrown at hurling, guard in her mind like an echo she couldn't shake. She had always known that power came from strength, from the ability to dominate and command respect. But now, after her encounter with him, she wondered if there was something more, something she had never considered before. She tried to push the thoughts away. After all, she was the queen ruler of an empire that spanned countless star systems. She had conquered worlds, crushed enemies, and built her empire through sheer will. Nothing could change that, not even a human. But the feeling, the nagging doubt, kept growing. It began with small things. Nerix found herself looking at her empire with different eyes, noticing how her people feared her more than they respected her. The loyalty she had built wasn't because they admired her, but because they feared the consequences of defying her. She saw it in their eyes when they looked at her, their submission, their silence, and then there were the whispers of rebellion, of unrest. In the shadows, there were those who had begun to question her rule. They saw the cracks in her leadership, the uncertainty that had begun to seep into her actions. The human had planted a seed, and now it was growing inside her. Taking root, Nerix was standing in the royal chambers, staring out at the galaxy beyond. The stars seemed to mock her, distant and cold. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Her closest advisor, a trusted member of her council, entered the room. "My queen," the advisor said, bowing low. "There is ... news. Unsettling news." Nerix turned to face him, her expression cold. "What is it?" "There are rumors," the advisor said, voice shaking slightly. "Rumors of ... a rebellion. Some of your subjects are beginning to question your rule. They speak of ... mercy, of change." The word struck her like a physical blow. She had always ruled with absolute power. She had never allowed anyone to question her authority. But now, here was her advisor, telling her that her own people, though she had worked so hard to control, were beginning to doubt her. Do they dare? Nerix's voice was sharp, filled with anger. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Who dares question me? Who dares to challenge the queen?" Her advisor hesitated, then spoke in a low, uncertain voice. "They are not speaking of violence, my queen. They are speaking of ... mercy. They speak of your strength, but also of your heart. They believe you are more than just a ruler." Nerix's heart skipped a beat. Mercy, heart. These words were foreign to her, foreign and weak. What good was mercy in a galaxy where only the strong survived? What good was a heart when power was all that mattered? She turned away, looking out at the stars again, but this time, they no longer seemed so distant. They felt close, like a reflection of the turmoil inside her. The seed the human had planted was growing stronger. She could feel it in every fiber of her being, and it terrified her. But there was something else, something deeper. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the human was right. Maybe she could lead with something more than fear. Maybe she could rule with strength and compassion. But the idea of it, the thought of changing everything she had worked for, made her stomach twist. "What should we do?" the advisor asked, watching her closely. Nerix didn't answer immediately. She felt a strange sense of vulnerability, something she hadn't felt in centuries. The weight of her empire was pressing down on her, but now it felt heavier than ever. She had always believed she was in control, that her strength and fear were enough to keep everything in line. But now, the foundation of her rule was beginning to crack. She turned to face her advisor, her expression dark. "Tell them to gather the leaders. I will address them myself." The advisor bowed low and left the room. Nerix stood there alone, her mind racing. She had made her decision. She would not be weak. She would not allow a human, or anyone, to make her question who she was. But something in her heart told her that the rebellion wasn't just about power. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand yet. Could she truly rule with mercy and strength? Could she lead with both? The sound of approaching footsteps broke her thoughts. She turned to see the human standing in the doorway. He had returned, as he promised. His eyes were calm, but there was a fire in them, an intensity that she had come to recognize. "You came back," Nerix said, her voice cool but with an edge. "Of curiosity, I did," the human replied, stepping closer. "I told you I would." Nerix studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. She had expected this moment to be filled with anger or defiance, but instead it was filled with something else, understanding. "I've made my decision," she said slowly. "I will address the leaders. We will see where this path leads." The human nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "I believe in you, Nerix. I always have." The words struck her harder than she expected. For the first time, she wasn't just the queen of an empire. She was someone who was beginning to consider a new way, a new future. But would it be enough? Would mercy and strength be enough to hold her empire together? The thought lingered in her mind as she turned to face the future, uncertain, but no longer unwilling to change. The struggle within the days leading up to Nerix's address to her people were filled with a turmoil she had never experienced before. The weight of her empire, once a comforting presence, now felt like a burden she could no longer ignore. Her thoughts were consumed by the human's words, by the challenge he had given her. What if he was right? What if there was more to leadership than just fear and strength? But doubt, as powerful as it was not enough to shake Nerix's foundations. She had built an empire, one that spanned across galaxies. She had carved her place in the universe with her own claws, and she was not about to let a single human make her question everything. She had been raised to believe that mercy was weakness, that showing any softness would lead to the downfall of everything she had worked for. And yet, here she was, standing on the precipice of change. The council chambers were filled with the most influential members of her empire. They were seated in their usual positions, silent, waiting for the queen to speak. The atmosphere was tense, thick with expectation. The empire's leaders had heard the rumors of rebellion, of whispers calling for change, and they were eager to see where Nerix stood. The queen's silence over the past few days had only fueled their curiosity. What was she going to do? Nerix entered the room, her regal presence filling the space. Her 8-foot frame towered over the council members, her armor gleaming in the dim light of the chamber. She was the queen, and yet, in this moment, she didn't feel like she was in control. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could feel the weight of every eye on her. This wasn't just a council meeting, it was a turning point. She took her seat at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping across the room. The council members were watching her closely, waiting for her to make a decision. She could feel their judgment, their anticipation. They were all expecting her to come down hard, to remind them of the strength of her rule, to crush any thoughts of rebellion beneath her feet. That's what they expected. But was that what she wanted? The room was silent as Nerix looked at her people, the faces she had ruled for so long. There have been whispers, she began, her voice cold and steady. Whispers of rebellion, of discontent. Some of you question my rule. You wonder if mercy is a weakness. You wonder if strength alone is enough to hold this empire together. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, but Nerix continued, her voice unwavering. I have ruled with power and fear, and I will not deny that my empire has grown, strong because of it. But today, I stand before you and ask what if there is more to strength than fear? What if there is a way to lead with respect, with understanding, without losing the power we fought so hard to build? The council members exchanged nervous glances. They had expected anger, retribution, but not this. They had never seen their queen question herself. It unsettled them. I do not ask for rebellion, Nerix continued. I do not ask for weakness. I ask for trust. Trust that I can lead with both strength and compassion. I ask you to consider a new path, one where power is not just about fear, but about understanding. The words felt foreign to her, but they left her with a strange sense of peace. For the first time, she was speaking not as a ruler imposing her will, but as a leader opening her mind to new possibilities. The silence in the room was deafening. One of the council members, a loyal servant to Nerix for many years, spoke up. My queen, he said, his voice shaking slightly. You speak of change, but change is dangerous. We are the strongest empire in the galaxy because we do not show weakness. If we change now, if we give mercy to our enemies, we risk everything. We risk losing control, losing our place at the top. Nerix looked at him, her expression stern. I did not come here to abandon our strength. I came here to explore a way that we can be even stronger by leading with a balance of power and respect. Fear alone will not keep us united forever. The people are restless, and if we do not change, we risk alienating them. The council member lowered his gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. Nerix could see the doubt in his eyes. He had always believed that strength was the key to everything, but now he was starting to see what Nerix had been grappling with, the need for something more. The silence lingered, broken only by the sound of Nerix's voice. I will not abandon what we've built, but I will not ignore the need for change. This empire will be stronger, not in spite of compassion, but because of it, and I will lead us into that future. The room remained silent for a long moment, the council members processing her words. Finally, the same council member who had spoken before raised his head and looked her in the eyes. You have our trust, my queen. We will follow you. For the first time, Nerix felt a sense of relief wash over her. The decision had been made, and it wasn't the one she had expected. She had feared that her people would reject her, that they would see her as weak, but instead they were willing to follow her. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. She looked at the human, standing quietly in the corner of the room, watching her with his steady gaze. A small flicker of something stirred inside her. He had been right. She wasn't just a queen of fear. She was a queen of strength and mercy. And for the first time, Nerix was ready to embrace both. The struggle within her was far from over. But the first step had been taken. And Nerix knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a new chapter for her and her empire. Confrontation, the weight of the decision, had settled upon Nerix like a heavy cloak, but the queen stood tall. Change was in the air, and she could feel it in every corner of her palace, in every whisper among her people. She had stepped into the unknown, and there was no turning back now. The rebellion, the murmurs of discontent, had not gone away, but Nerix had something stronger on her side now. Trust. The trust of her council, the trust of her people, and most of all, the trust she had started to build in herself. But there were those who would not so easily accept the Queen's new direction. Her decision to rule with strength and mercy had earned her some allies, but it had also made her enemies. In the shadows, factions were forming. Those who still believed in the old ways, those who believed that Nerix was weakening herself by listening to the whispers of mercy and respect. One of those factions had made their move. It wasn't long before Nerix heard of their rebellion. Not a rebellion against her rule, but against the very idea of change. A small group of her most loyal soldiers had broken ranks, convinced that their queen's compassion was a grave mistake. They had taken up arms, ready to fight to restore her to her old ways. The iron-fisted ruler they had once revered. It was a cold, silent evening when Nerix learned of their plans. Her trusted advisor, the one who had warned her about the growing unrest, came to her chamber with a grave look on his face. "My queen," he said, bowing low, "it's worse than we feared. The dissenters are gathering in the northern stronghold. They've begun to rally support from your most loyal soldiers. They believe you are betraying the Empire. They will strike soon." Nerix's heart pounded in her chest. This was not what she had hoped for. This wasn't just a small group of rebels, it was a threat from within her own ranks. She had known this moment would come, but she had hoped the rebellion would be nothing more than idle whispers. She had hoped that her people, her soldiers, would stand by her in her new vision. But as the advisor continued, the reality sank in. "They will come for you, my queen. They will not stop until they've restored your old rule. They see mercy as weakness. They believe that if they can defeat you, they can return things to the way they were." A shiver ran down Nerix's spine. She had always known that her rule would be challenged, but she had never expected it to come from her own people. From those who had once fought by her side, who had helped her build her empire. But now, they were the ones questioning her leadership. She stood up from her throne, her eyes cold and focused. "Gather the council," she ordered. "We will confront this rebellion. I will not allow my people to tear each other apart." As the council members filed into the room, their faces were filled with concern. They had stood by Nerix, trusted her, but now the reality of the situation was sinking in. The Queen's decision to change had left them vulnerable. The rebellion had found its foothold, and the consequences were now unavoidable. Nerix addressed them with a calmness that masked the storm inside her. "These rebels seek to undo everything we have built. They do not understand that power can be forged through strength and mercy. They want to drag us back into a time of fear and oppression. I will not let that happen. We will meet them on the battlefield, and we will show them that we can lead with both courage and compassion." One of her advisors, a seasoned military leader, stepped forward. "My queen, we are ready to fight. But you must understand, these soldiers are your most loyal. They fought alongside you in every campaign. If we attack them, we risk tearing apart everything you've worked for. This rebellion isn't just about power, it's about belief. They do not see what you see. They cannot understand the vision you have for this empire." Nerix nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Then we will show them. We will show them that there is more to power than just fear. We will show them that we can defeat them without losing who we are." The battle was set to take place at dawn in the northern stronghold, a fortress that had once been a symbol of Nerix's might. It was where she had begun her rise to power, and now it was the place where her empire would face its greatest test. As she stood before the council, preparing for the confrontation, Nerix felt a strange calm settle over her. She had spent so long fighting to maintain control, to assert her strength over everything and everyone. But now, she was fighting for something different, for a new vision, a vision that blended strength with compassion. She was no longer just the queen of fear. She was the queen of change. The night before the battle, Nerix stood alone in the courtyard, her eyes turned toward the stars. She thought of the human, the one who had challenged everything she had ever known. He had opened her eyes, made her see that there was more to life than power, that there was more to leadership than domination. She could feel the weight of the upcoming battle pressing down on her, but she was no longer afraid. She had made her choice, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. The next morning, Nerix led her forces into the northern stronghold, her steps firm and resolute. The rebels were waiting for her. They had gathered at the gates, their weapons drawn, ready to fight. Nerix raised her hand, signaling her forces to halt. She stepped forward, standing alone before the rebels, her armor gleaming in the first light of dawn. "I am your queen," she called out, her voice carrying over the battlefield. "And I will not let you tear this empire apart." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice from the crowd called out, "You are no queen. You have abandoned us. You have turned your back on the strength that made us great." Nerix's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "I have not abandoned you. I have only chosen a different path. And if you are strong enough to follow me, then you will see that we can lead with both strength and compassion. But if you choose to fight against me, then you will see the consequences of rejecting change." The rebel leader stepped forward, his face hardened with anger. "We will not follow you. You have betrayed us." And with those words, the battle began. But Nerix stood her ground, ready to face the consequences of her choices. The road ahead was uncertain, and the rebellion was far from over. But for the first time, Nerix knew that no matter the outcome, she was fighting for something worth believing in. A new future. The battle at the northern stronghold raged on. The ground shook beneath Nerix's feet as weapons clashed and the cries of soldiers filled the air. Her forces were well trained, but so were the rebels. They had once fought beside her, believed in her, and now they stood against her. Fueled by their anger and their fear of the unknown, Nerix stood tall in the center of the battlefield, her mind focused and sharp. Her warriors fought with the same intensity she had taught them. But the rebellion wasn't just a fight of strength, it was a fight of ideologies, a fight for the future of the empire itself. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing on her shoulders. The rebel leader, a former ally named Zarek, was at the forefront, his blade flashing in the sunlight as he cut down any who opposed him. He was powerful, determined, but Nerix could see the desperation in his eyes. He didn't just want to defeat her, he wanted to destroy everything she had worked for, everything she believed in. He was clinging to the old ways, the ways of fear and dominance, and he couldn't see beyond them. But Nerix saw beyond him. She saw the future. With a determined stride, she made her way toward the heart of the battlefield, cutting through her enemies with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Her soldiers parted to let her through, recognizing the resolve in her eyes. She was no longer the queen of oppression, she was the queen of change, of hope, and she was going to prove it to them all. Nerix's eyes locked onto Zarek as she approached. He was in the center of the battlefield, his back to her, rallying his forces. When he turned and saw her, his face twisted with fury. "You," Zarek spat, pointing his blade at her. "You're a traitor. You've abandoned everything that made us strong. You think mercy and compassion will save this empire. You're a fool." Nerix didn't flinch. She stood tall, her voice clear and unwavering as she spoke to him. "No, Zarek, I haven't abandoned anything. I'm not weak, and I'm not a fool. I've built this empire on strength, yes, but I've learned that real strength comes from understanding. It comes from the people who trust in me, not because they fear me, but because they believe in what I'm fighting for." Zarek's eyes narrowed. "You've lost your way, Nerix. You'll never be the queen we need." Nerix's voice was steady, but there was a fire in it now, something she hadn't felt before. "No, Zarek, you've lost your way. You think fear is the only thing that can hold an empire together, but fear makes people resent you. It makes them turn against you. The empire is stronger when its people trust their leader, when they believe in something greater than themselves." For a moment, there was silence between them. The sounds of the battle around them seemed to fade into the background, and it was just Nerix and Zarek standing in the heart of the storm. "Seen it," Nerix continued, her voice softer now. "I've seen the change in the people. They want something different. They want to believe in a future where strength doesn't have to come at the cost of compassion, where they don't have to live in fear of their ruler." Zarek scoffed, raising his blade. "Then you'll see the truth, Queen. This empire will fall with your weakness." But Nerix didn't back down. She was done with fear. She was done with fighting for control. She was fighting for something greater now, something that could bring her people together, not tear them apart. With a swift movement, she stepped forward, parrying Zarek's attack with ease. He was strong, but his anger made him reckless. Nerix used his own strength against him, knocking him off balance before disarming him with a single, fluid motion. Zarek fell to the ground, his blade sliding away from him. He looked up at her, breathless, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You've defeated me." "No, Zarek," Nerix said, offering him a hand. "I've shown you a different path, one that doesn't have to end in violence." For a moment, Zarek hesitated, his pride and anger warring inside him. But as he looked into Nerix's eyes, something in him seemed to shift. The fury faded, and for the first time, he saw the woman who had once been his queen, not just a ruler, but someone who truly cared for the future of her people. Slowly, he took her hand, rising to his feet. I don't know if I can follow you," he said, his voice low. "But I see now that you're not the woman I thought you were." Nerix nodded, her expression softening. "I'm not the woman I once was, Zarek, and neither are you. But we can choose to be something better, together." The battle slowly began to quiet as the rebels, seeing their leader fall, started to surrender. They weren't defeated by force, but by the strength of Nerix's message, the message of change, of leadership through trust and compassion. As the dust settled, Nerix stood in the middle of the battlefield, her heart heavy but resolute. The fight had been hard, and the road ahead would not be easy. But she knew one thing for certain. She had made the right choice. She had fought not for power, but for a new vision where strength and mercy coexisted, where her people could stand together, united by something greater than fear. Her empire was not just a place of domination and control. It was a place of hope, of resilience, and of a future that could be shaped by every person who believed in it. And with that, Nerix knew that this was just the beginning of a new era. She turned to the human, who had been watching from the edge of the battlefield. He smiled, his eyes filled with pride and respect. "You did it," he said softly. "You showed them." Nerix nodded, her gaze turning toward the horizon. "We did it," she said, "and this empire will thrive because we believe in each other." And with that, Nerix took her first step into the future, ready to lead her people into a new era of strength, trust, and compassion.